The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Cheryl, and I'm joined today by Gino, and we're going to be discussing how to configure a personal monitor system. But before we get into that, just a few quick items of housekeeping. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, so if you'd like to go back and re-listen to it or direct a colleague to it, you can go to shure.com/training and click on the webinar archives link there, and this will be archived usually about a week after the session. And all of our past webinars are there as well. So there's a lot of great learning and knowledge to be obtained by going to shure.com/training. Please feel free to peruse that site. Second order of housekeeping is if you have any questions throughout the process of this webinar, just in your right-hand corner of your screen, you're going to see a little sort of window where you can ask questions. Feel free to ask anything. We will answer those, as many as we can, at the end of the session. So if you can't see that little window, there's going to be a little orange arrow, a little box with an orange arrow. Just click on that. That will maximize that window for you so you can see it. So feel free to ask any questions. So I believe that wraps up all of the items of note. Let's move forward to the bulk of this presentation. Take it away, Gino.
All right. Thanks, Cheryl. And thanks to everyone for joining us here this afternoon to talk about one of our favorite topics, personal monitor systems, more specifically how to configure them. Reason we kind of decided to do this particular topic this month is because if you weren't already aware, we actually did just introduce a new addition to the lineup of Shure personal monitor systems, the PSM 300 system. We'll actually give you a little bit of an overview of that one kind of towards the end of the webinar here. But we really wanted to spend some time here helping you learn the things that you need to know when configuring a system. I think we've done it's not like I'm patting ourselves on the back too much, but a pretty good job of convincing people of what the benefits of personal monitor systems are. And there are many, and we'll give you a brief recap. But, in the early days of wireless personal monitor systems, we really used to, kind of go out, really kind of hitting the road, trying to, get people to understand what all the benefits of using them are. I think that's pretty well known, but what's still the stumbling block people run up a lot to is like, okay, well, what do I buy now? What do I need to get to make this happen? So hopefully what you'll come out with at the end of this webinar is an understanding of the questions you need to ask yourself so that you can make an informed purchase decision, not just as far as which system to buy, but more along the lines of how many of each component and what other ancillary equipment you might need and that sort of a thing. Again, personal monitor systems have really, come a long way in terms of adding a lot of new features and things that make it practical for any user, really, no matter what your budget is. I mean, when they first started being used kind of in the late 80s, early 90s, it was something that only the highest end of the highest end could afford to use. But it's really gotten to a point now where, there's a personal monitor system that can fit almost anybody's budget. And we'll use the term personal monitor and in-ears kind of interchangeably here. A lot of people just refer to these things as in-ear monitor systems. It's the same basic concept. And I may even be asking Cheryl to add some color commentary here and there throughout the webinar here. I'm sure for those of you who have been on our webinars before, are used to hearing her voice at the beginning and the end of these webinars, but you may not know that she is also a singer of some considerable talent and a longtime user of in-ear monitor systems.
Well, that first comment is up to everyone's opinion. The second one is true. I have been using IEMs for quite a while.
What was that? What did you say? 10 years?
Yeah, about 10 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. We get some real firsthand experience here. I've been on the other side of it for the most part, mixing bands that have used in-ear monitor systems and helping bands that are looking into it make the appropriate choices and helping them configure things like that. So first, let's just start with a quick definition of what we're talking about when we say a personal monitor system. I mean, everyone kind of gets this or sort of knows conceptually what they are, but the real definition of it is that it's a closed monitor system, meaning that the personal monitor system doesn't depend on, nor does it contribute to the acoustic environment that you're using it in. Unlike a traditional floor wedge type monitor system where there's speakers spread across the stage pointing up at the heads of various band members and all of those loudspeakers making a giant racket. So it definitely affects the whole environment, right? You might, be the lead singer standing in front of your floor wedge, and by the time you turn that thing loud up loud enough so that you can hear yourself. Well, guess what? Everybody else on stage can hear it too. And then as far as affecting the environment, when you go to in-ear monitors, now you shoved the loudspeakers into your head and isolated them there so you can hear whatever you want without contributing anything else to the acoustic environment. And that includes the audience too, because wedge loudspeakers still have spill that happens into the audience area that affects what they're hearing too. And then again, you can now personalize your mix more, because what's going on in your head is what you want to hear, because you're hopefully using an isolating earphone that is reducing the ambient sound level of everything else going on the stage, so that again, you're not being affected by what else is going on around you. You're kind of in your own little monitoring world there. So there's some significant benefits to this. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, probably most important again is sufficient volume, right? Again, when you're standing on stage with a traditional wedge monitor and you're standing next to the drummer and the guitar player who's got 3 Marshall stacks cranked all the way up, it gets pretty loud and it gets hard to hear yourself. So by going in ear, again, it allows you to hear at a more comfortable and hopefully safer listening level. There's no feedback. Remember, feedback occurs whenever a microphone gets too close to a loudspeaker, and so traditional monitor systems are kind of a recipe for feedback disaster. But if you get rid of those floor monitors and have the speakers sealed up in your ear canal, that goes away. They're extremely portable if you carry around your own PA system and you don't want to lug around, big speakers and power amps. I mean, there's much smaller, more portable components to a wireless in-ear system. And it also gives the performer some ability to control the mix, what they're hearing themselves, and how much or how little control you get varies depending on your individual setup and things like that. But again, it's something that is typically not really practical with a loudspeaker type system, but with in-ears definitely works. And these come in both wireless and hardwired varieties. It's one of the choices you're going to have to make, and we'll talk about the pros and cons in a little bit there, but both types do exist. So first of all, let's give you an overview of the components that make up a personal monitor system. What are the things that you're going to need to have a system like this work? Most obvious one is the earphones, right? If you don't have earphones, then you can't hear anything. And these are a very particular type of earphone that you want to use with an in-ear monitor system, because it's very important that you have an isolating earphone, something that blocks out loud, unwanted, or ambient sounds on stage. You're trying to kind of remove yourself again from that usually really loud acoustic environment, and trying to again create your own little personal world to listen in, and a isolating earphone is required for that. So that means that you're not going to use your iPod earbuds to monitor on stage for a professional application, because those things don't really isolate at all. They just kind of sit in your ear and make a little bit of sound. So you really can't use those. You really have to get one of these professional type of in-ear earphones. There are kind of 2 basic types: custom earphones that are specifically made just to fit in your ear, right, with a custom mold, or universal type of earphones, which is what all the Shure SE earphones that you might get in conjunction with one of our personal monitor systems. And by universal, we mean that there's one model that everybody buys, and they come with a variety of sleeve adapters that you put on the earphone that then fit into your ear or into anybody else's ear, which is why we call them universal. So something like, you look at this little foam sleeve here on this earphone, right? That's actually it's like an earplug basically with a hole in it. So the earphone goes into the hole, and then you wear this like an earplug, and it should seal up very tightly and block out, a pretty good amount of ambient sound, which again allows you to listen to what you want to hear at hopefully a safer level, right? I mean, that's kind of the goal here. We'll talk more about that later too. And all of our earphones include a variety of different sleeve adapters too, in different sizes and different materials, so that you can choose the one that is most comfortable and fits best for you. The custom option, again, requires a visit to the audiologist, because that's where you actually go have an impression made of your ear canal. And then that impression is used to custom form the earphone specifically just for you. You can't loan it to let anybody else use or try, because it only fits in your ear.
And that would be really gross.
Yes, it would. That's true. So that's another option. It's typically a more expensive option, although again, even within the Shure line of universal earphones, we have earphones that range from $79 to almost $1,000. A good custom earphone is going to run you probably closer to the $1,000 mark. There aren't really many or any inexpensive custom earphones that I'm aware of. But, so you got the budgetary consideration there too. There's some debate out there as to, which type gives you a better seal, the universal versus the custom. We're not going to get into that debate because ultimately it's kind of user preference. Again, the good thing about universal earphones is you can try them. And if you don't like them, you're either A, not out that much money, or B, you can try the different sleeves and experiment. Once you invest in the custom molds, they're yours. You can't really return them, to my knowledge. So there's that to consider. But again, both options are out there. Some people prefer, one over the other. And with the Shure earphones, you can actually have a custom sleeve made for those, kind of the best of both worlds. If you want to start out with the universal earphones and decide, I really like these, but I wish I had something custom fit, you can have a sleeve made that will custom fit the SE earphones. Two different types of technologies that are used inside of the earphones, either a dynamic driver or what's called a balanced armature driver, which is a technology that's kind of borrowed from the hearing aid industry. The difference is that dynamic drivers tend to be more inexpensive, so more the entry-level models might feature a dynamic driver, but the frequency response is somewhat limited. The balanced armatures typically are more sensitive with higher output, wider ranging frequency response, and can be made much smaller, but they're a little bit more expensive too. Again, just more options that are out there. So obviously when you're configuring your system, every person is going to need a pair of earphones. Can't really share those. So then you have to make the choice of whether or not you're going to go wireless or hardwired. Most people tend to think of the in-ear monitor systems as being a wireless system, right? Because that is one of the main benefits, right? If you think about with a floor monitor, when you're listening to yourself on stage, you pretty much have to be standing right in front of that thing for it to sound good. As soon as you take a few steps away from the sweet spot of the monitor, it doesn't sound good anymore if you can hear it at all. But with an in-ear monitor system, again, the speakers are in your ears, so the mix goes where you go, and why not go wireless so that you can go wherever you want to go. But if you're a drummer or a keyboard player and you don't really move around, then you don't really need to be wireless. So hardwired systems are a simpler, more inexpensive way to get into in-ear monitoring, but you still have a nice belt pack with a volume control on it to easily adjust your listening level and things like that. So again, a hardwired system is a good alternative if you don't need to be moving around. But if you'd like to be able to move around a lot, or if you'd like to be able to share mixes easily, a wireless system might be the way to go. Obviously, a little bit higher cost. There's a little bit more complexity in the setup as far as choosing frequencies and things like that, which we'll show you how that's done a little bit later on in the presentation here. But there is those options. So the receiver is the next component we want to talk about. This is the body packs like you see pictured here. Sometimes people get confused by this because it's the opposite of a wireless microphone system where in the case of a wireless mic system or a wireless guitar system, the body pack is the transmitter and the receiver is the thing that goes in the rack or plugs into your guitar amp. But in the case of an in-ear monitor system, it's the other way around. The transmitter is the rack mount device. The body pack is the receiver. That's the thing you actually wear. It picks up the signal and allows you to listen to it. And you can see they come in both single antenna and diversity options. Again, the diversity is just a little bit more robust in the RF realm for like the kind of ultimate in dropout free performance to the extent that it's possible. But that also comes at a particularly high price tag. In our lineup, it's only available on the PSM 1000 system. But then again, another choice that's out there. But of course, every performer that wants to be in ear is going to need a body pack. So one for each performer there. The transmitters is where it gets a little bit different because how many transmitters you need depends on how many mixes you're trying to put out there. And that's kind of what we're going to get into in the next section is how you even figure that out. But the simplest way to think about it is a sort of a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Which is you're going to need a transmitter for every wireless mix you need to put out there. Unless you're taking advantage of a feature we call mix mode, which we'll show you more about in a little bit. But then in that case, you can actually put up 2 mono mixes with a single transmitter. But something that is really kind of misunderstood about in-ear monitor systems is that you can have as many receivers as you would like, all listening to the same transmitter. So if there was some magical utopian band out there where everybody all wanted to listen to the same thing in their ears, you could buy one transmitter and a receiver for everyone in the band.
Does that exist?
In my imagination as a sound guy. But that is a possibility with these systems. But at least maybe you can share, so something to think about. An analogy is to think about, listening to the radio in your car, right? I mean, each one of these transmitters is like a miniature radio station. So if everybody wants to listen to the local classic rock station in your town, everyone driving around in their car can tune into that station and listen to it. And it's the exact same concept here. It becomes a personal radio station for the band. So the number of transmitters will vary. And one of the things that differentiates in-ear monitor systems as you go up in price is how many transmitters you can get on the air on clear compatible frequencies at the same time. But in the case of our new entry level system, the PSM 300 can still do 15 transmitters at a time. That's a lot of mixes.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot.
Yeah. Although Cheryl can maybe speak from experience. How many mixes does your band have?
9.
Okay. Yet PSM 300 would still work.
It would.
But if you go up to PSM 900 and PSM 1000, again, as you step up through the line, you get that ability to have more mixes being broadcast simultaneously. Just for point of reference, the PSM 200, which is being discontinued very shortly, if it's not already, could do a maximum of maybe 4.
And that was in an ideal RF environment.
In an ideal RF environment, yeah. So we've kind of come a little ways in there, but still an important question to ask. So speaking of that, let's move into some configuration considerations then. First of all, just to kind of set the stage here, it's really important to understand sort of the rest of the ecosystem that's involved in an in-ear monitor system. When you buy a personal monitor system from Shure, what you're really buying is the mechanism for delivering the mix to the performers, wirelessly or hardwired, and out via earbuds. But these systems themselves don't really do much mixing. In other words, the actual blend of sounds that the performers are hearing has to come from somewhere else, right? Usually that somewhere else is a mixer that's installed in the venue where you're playing, or maybe you carry your own PA and you have a mixer, or maybe you have one of these, fancy distributed mixing systems, which we'll talk about later, but it has to come from somewhere else. In other words, buying just a Shure personal monitor system doesn't be like, great, we've got in-ears, why don't I hear anything? Because you still have to, connect the rest of the stuff to it. So audio signals, from the various inputs are routed to a mixer or mixing device that is then connected to the transmitters, which makes that signal wireless. It goes to the receiver that takes that wireless signal, turns it back into good old analog audio and back out through the earphones. There is some limited mix capability available on these systems if you use our mix mode feature, which we'll talk about more in a minute here. But again, that's kind of the sort of the 4 sort of simple steps for kind of getting a mix going. But there's some things you really need to kind of think about ahead of time. You have to do some homework before you buy an in-ear monitor system. First question you have to ask is, how many people are in your band? How many people are in your band, Cheryl?
9.
And that was 9 mixes, right?
Yeah, we're spoiled.
Okay. Well, so you have that's kind of an obvious one, and I could revise this question to say, well, how many people in your band are going to be using the in-ears? I mean, there may be 1 or 2 or several that don't want to. Maybe you're the only one, but you have to kind of think about that ahead of time. Then you have to ask, what does each person want to hear in their mix? Again, if it was that utopian band where everybody wants to hear the same thing, that's one. If you're Cheryl's band where everybody wants to hear something different, then that's something else, right? So you really have to have that discussion, and it's good to figure that out to see it, because it's great if you have the luxury of being able to provide an individualized mix for every person in the band. The economics of some people's situation might be different, and maybe you're trying to save money. So if you can figure out who can share a mix, who can listen to the same transmitter's mix, then that's going to save you some money. So that's the next thing. Can anyone share a mix? And then ultimately that leads to how many mixes that you need. So how many people are going to go in here? What do they want to hear? Can anyone share? And that will lead you to how many mixes you need, which then determines how many transmitters you're going to need. So that's kind of where we're at here. Repeated information there. But we wanted to talk about the mix mode feature here too. So one way that you might be able to save money is by going into a mono listening environment. Now, a lot of people think of in-ear monitors as sort of stereo devices, right? Where you hear something different or a stereo image panned across the left and the right, just like when you're listening to, stereo music out of your iPod or stereo loudspeakers at home. There's two of them, right? And a stereo in-ear monitor system can certainly do that. It can broadcast a stereo signal, but you might be able to think of it more in terms of, instead of left and right, of kind of a left and right image of the same thing. What if the left and the right were two totally different things? If you did that in this kind of dual mono mix mode capability, you can actually use one transmitter to put up two mixes. So let's kind of see how that works. It's always much better when you can hear this audibly, but to kind of maybe give you a graphical representation of it, if you're listening to a stereo signal, and this goes for whether or not, again, it's stereo loudspeakers at home or stereo in-ears or whatever it happens to be, right? The balance control, or what's sometimes called a pan control, right, allows you to basically decide which side is getting more level, the left or the right side. So in a traditional stereo operation, if you pan to the left, you hear all kinds of signal to the left and nothing in the right, which makes it sound like everything's happening on one side and you're not hearing anything on the other side. And that's not really used very much. Normally in stereo mode, you just leave it up the middle, right? But if you go into mix mode operation, this is an adjustment you make on the receiver. What it does is it takes those left and right signals and sums them together to both ears, rather than routing left just to left and right just to right. So you're hearing the same thing in both ears. And then when you adjust the balance control, it adjusts the relative level of what you're hearing in either ear. So for example, let's say we have all the vocals connected to channel number 1, or the left input, and all of the band instruments connected to the right input, or channel 2. If we pan all the way to the left, in air quotes, if I could do air quotes in a webinar, right? What you would really be doing is basically only hearing channel 1 in both ears and not hearing anything from channel 2 in both ears. So you don't get that discombobulating everything on the left side or everything on the right side. You hear equally well out of both earphones. You're just adjusting the relative blend between those two signals. So again, if it's vocals on one side and guitars on the other one, the performer themselves right on their pack can adjust how much of each signal they're hearing, still with only a single transmitter. It's just, again, the stereo transmitter is now doing two mono signals instead of a single stereo mix. So that's mix mode. So let's look at a few examples here. So here's a fictitious band of 5 people here. So we've answered that first question. We have 5 people in the band. We're going to assume for this exercise that they all want to go in-ear. So who wants to hear what? Well, this is that magical band where everybody wants to listen to the same mix. They really want to blend naturally.
Doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen. But let's pretend it does. You would need one transmitter and a receiver and earphones for every person in the band. And that's your in-ear monitor system. Again, they all tune into the same frequency coming off that transmitter. Works like a charm.
Done.
As inevitably happens, somebody's going to want to hear something different than everybody else. It's usually the singer.
Hey.
You have to watch out for those redheaded lead singers. And then, so you need a mix for just the lead singer and then a mix of all the rest of the band instruments, right? Now, because of the mix mode capabilities of these systems, you could get away with still a single transmitter with the singer's vocal mic signal going into input 1 or left, and the rest of the blend of the instruments going into input 2 or right. Everybody still gets a receiver with earphones, but then using the balance control, the singer pans all the way to the left, everybody else pans all the way to the right. Again, they're still hearing sound in both ears, but now singer is just hearing her mic coming out of mix 1, right? And everybody else is hearing the mix of band instruments going into mix 2 or the right input to the transmitter. And you don't have to pan it all the way one way or all the way to the other. You can actually kind of go anywhere in between to get that blend of whatever it is that you want to hear. So if you're over there playing acoustic guitar and you want to hear a little bit of the singer, you might kind of go a little bit more towards the middle so you can get some of that as well. So it allows you to make that choice. That's where some of that sort of personal control starts to come into it. One more example here. Let's go to 3 mixes. So we'll still have the mix for the singer and for everyone that's playing an instrument, except for the drummer, because that's usually how it goes, is then the drummer's the next one to want their own mix because they always want more kick and snare than everybody else wants to listen to.
Singers and drummers, man.
Yep. So in this case, we'll still only have one transmitter, and you'll see why in a minute. We're still going to do mix mode with the singer on the left and everybody in the band into the right or number 2 input. And then we're going to give the drummer a hardwired system, right? So he doesn't need to be wireless because he doesn't go anywhere anyway. So you have a little hardwired pack in line for the connected directly to the mixer for the drummer there. And now we've got 3 mixes on the air. If the drummer needed to be wireless for some reason, then we would just add another transmitter in and be able to have 3 wireless mixes going. Actually, you could think of it actually 4 mixes because you could use that second transmitter in mix mode as well. So these can be scaled up. And something that we've always kind of had to question, we've had to answer over the years here is, people are sometimes looking for sort of a cookie cutter package they can buy for in-ear monitors, but there really is no such thing because it's so unique. It's why they're called personal monitors, why we like that word over just in-ear, is because it's not just about being an ear, but it's about having that personal level of configurability. So you really have to have those discussions as a band, ask those questions, and then you'll know what it is that you're supposed to be buying. And if you're calling from a retailer out there, and instead, these are the kinds of questions that you would want to ask someone that walks in and says, I want to buy an in-ear monitor system. You can't really just hand them a box and go, here you go, have fun with that. And you really got to, ask some of these questions to help get down to the right thing. Let's talk about how the mix gets there, though, right? So where does it come from? As I mentioned, it's got to come from somewhere. The most typical sort of straight ahead application is all your mic inputs get connected to a mixer of some sort. In this case, could be a dedicated monitor mixer, could be auxiliary sends from the front of house console, but all these signals go somewhere and get mixed. And then connected directly to the inputs of the transmitter. This particular mixer has 6 stereo mixes available on it, so we could do connect to 6 transmitters here and put 6 wireless stereo mixes up on the air. This is a fairly high-end way of doing it. If you carry your own monitor mixer, it's a good way to go. If you're maybe like a gigging band, like a wedding band or something like this, and you want to go in-ear, you carry around a mixer like this, and you're all set to go with plenty of wireless, plenty of mixing capability going on here. So that's one way to do it. The more common way that a lot of people might run into, though, is showing up at a club where there's already a sound system and handing your transmitter or transmitters to the sound person and saying, here we are, hook up our in-ear system. So it helps to know a little bit about what it is you're actually asking for when you do that. And it leads to another important part of the equation here, which is that how many auxiliary sends or additional outputs does the mixer at the venue have? Because you are going to need 1 auxiliary send per mono mix you want to put on the air. So if there's 4 people in your band and you have 2 transmitters that you're using in mix mode, so you need 4 mixes from the console, well, you better hope that console has 4 sends available on it. And in fact, Cheryl, you guys carry your own mixer for monitors, right?
We do, yeah. There's no way that we could rely on all the venues that we go to have more, to have 9 mixes available. So we just figure it's easier to bring it ourselves.
Yep. And if you if you can do that, that's great. But sometimes you have to live with what's there, and if you show up and the club says, hey, I only have 2 aux sends available for this, well, then you're going to have to figure out how to make 2 mixes work. So that is a particular limitation to the system. So you do have to look into that. So here's a few examples just to kind of blow through these quickly, just to kind of see how these can play out. But again, assuming we're doing like a single transmitter mix mode type of situation, so two mono mixes, again, option 1, kind of like what we already showed, a vocal mix and a band mix. But maybe you could do like sort of lead instruments, vocals, guitars, horns on one side, and backline, drums, bass on the other side. Option number 3, the ego mix, right? Just one source, lead singer, lead guitarist, whatever on one side, everything else on the other side. There's a couple different ways to configure that. If you have 3 aux sends available, then maybe you can think about, like we showed earlier, adding a dedicated mix for the drummer on a hardwired system is one option, kind of similar to what we had before, but just throwing in that hardwired system. And if we have the luxury of 2 transmitters, there's a couple of different ways you can configure it. In this scenario, there's still only 3 aux sends available from the main front of house board. But what we did is we kind of looped out one of the outputs from the first transmitter into the second transmitter. So we took the band mix, right, which is coming out of aux 2 from our console here, goes into the transmitter, and then that loops out into the second transmitter. So both mix mode mixes can take advantage of that. If you're listening to transmitter number 1, you can blend between the vocal mix and the band mix. If you're on transmitter number 2, you can blend between the horn mix and the band mix, which again came looped in from transmitter number 1. So again, that's why there's no cookie cutter solutions. That you can make it work however you need to. Then of course, if you have 4 mono mixes available from your console and 2 transmitters in mix mode, you've just got, again, more flexibility. You could put literally 4 discrete mixes up on the air. So you can have a mix for the singer, a mix for the guitar player, a mix for the bass player, a mix for the drummer. It's one option. If you need more than this, then you add more transmitters. Just scales up.
Mm-hmm.
There are other third-party systems out there that allow you to do what's called distributed mixing, which is giving the performers the ability to mix themselves rather than having to, even if you're, set up like Cheryl's band is, where you have a dedicated monitor console. If every time you want to make an adjustment, someone's got to run over there and turn some knobs. With a distributed mixing system, these little mixing pods kind of go out at the performer's location, where they can then make adjustments right there on the fly at any time to their personal mix. And then of course, when you do this, that means nobody's sharing a mix anymore. Each person has their personal mix. So that also requires an individual transmitter and receiver for every person. But it's another option for getting it out there. And how these systems work is there's a couple of different ways. These ones that are shown here, typically all the microphone signals get connected to kind of a head end of the system, where the mic signals are digitized and distributed out to these pods via like network cable, like Cat5 cable. It's basically how these systems interconnect. And then so the signals arrive digitally at these locations where you can make your mix adjustments. There's also some digital mixers now available that allow you to mix off of iPads. So you can have a Wi-Fi router that connects to your mixing console, and all your iPads are linked to that router, and you run a little app on the iPad that allows you to create your monitor mix right there. So all of this does require some training, I think, on the part of the performers that are going to be doing this. There's some art to mixing and making it sound good. Just because you have the ability doesn't mean the capabilities to do this doesn't necessarily mean it'll produce the desired end result. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But it's another option for, again, part of the infrastructure that might be needed when you're using in your monitor systems. So again, just to kind of sum up all of that stuff about how many components do I need, again, the first question is, are you in stereo or are you in mono? And are you doing dual mono or mix mode, right? And if you're stereo, it's very easy. You need one transmitter for every stereo mix that's on the air. But that also requires twice as many aux sends, because remember, stereo requires 2 things, a left and a right signal. So you need actually twice as many aux sends as you do transmitters if you're doing stereo. And the same thing in dual mono mode, twice as many aux sends as transmitters, but you need half as many transmitters because each transmitter can put 2 mono mixes up on the air. And of course, mono, if you're doing mono, which you would do maybe with PSM 200 or something like that, the number of transmitters equals the number of desired mixes. Again, in all cases, the number of receivers equals the number of performers. 5 people in your band, you need 5 receivers. Let's take a little turn here through kind of setting up and operating a system like this, particularly in terms of the wireless systems and the frequency coordination. As I mentioned earlier, when you go wireless, it does add a little bit more complexity potentially to the system, because you want to make sure that you've chosen clean, clear, compatible channels so that you don't get dropouts and strange noises and other distracting artifacts in the performer's ears. Most newer systems have lots of frequencies, and then finding a clear frequency for a moderate number of systems shouldn't be a problem. But let's say we had 4 systems. How do we get these on good channels? The receivers have the capability of scanning and finding clear channels. So that's all you really have to do is hit the scan button on the receiver and then sync that to the transmitters. It happened kind of fast there, right? But what happened was, it scanned on the receiver, it finds a clear frequency, and then you hit the sync, you hold it up to the transmitter and hit the sync button, and the receiver sends that frequency it just found to that transmitter. So we've got a clear frequency for transmitter number 1. Now we need a clear frequency for transmitter number 2. Utilizing the same body pack, we just hit the scan button again, picks the next clear channel, sync that to the second receiver, then do it again for the third receiver, and finally do it for the 4th receiver. So using just one body pack, stand there on stage before sound check and just scan, sync, scan, sync, scan, sync, scan, sync. Boom. Everybody's all set and ready to go on clear channels. it's pretty straight ahead, but it's something that a lot of people don't realize they need to do, particularly if you're touring and moving around from city to city. It's really important to do this before every show to make sure that you've picked good frequencies for that location. So once we've done that, then the next thing we need to do is make sure that every receiver that goes with the corresponding transmitter picks up those frequencies. And ignore the fact I was a little lazy with the cut and pasting here. It looks like all the transmitters have the same frequency. That's just because I reused the same graphic. So
I want to be in a band with 4 lead vocalists.
oh, jeez. Especially if they were all in the same frequency. So what we do now is you IR sync again, but rather than hitting the scan button on the receiver, since we've already got clear frequencies, you just take that first receiver, power it up, and open the battery compartment, hold it up to the first transmitter, hit sync, boom, that's got the frequency from transmitter number 1, and then repeat for transmitter number 2 to body pack number 2, and transmitter number 3 to body pack 3, and transmitter 4 to body pack number 4. So it's kind of a 2-step process. You use one receiver to scan and find frequencies, program up all your transmitters, and then sync additional receivers to those transmitters. And even if we were in the scenario of just, the magical band where everybody's listening to the same mix and we only had one transmitter, you would just then sync everybody's receiver to that same transmitter. They'd all pick up that same frequency and they would all be listening to the same thing. And so the lead singer decided she wanted her own mix. So that's a little bit of the RF basics for setting things up here. Let's talk a little bit about mixing. As I mentioned earlier, if you're going to be mixing yourself, the common novice mistake that people who are mixing in-ears for themselves make is they want to put everything in their ears. I want it to sound like the CD, so throw it all in there, right? Well, again, that is something that takes a little bit of work, a little bit of practice, some years of experience to really get good at. Again, just because you have the knobs doesn't mean you necessarily know how to turn them, right? So a better approach, particularly with in-ear monitors for someone who's new to mixing, is only put things in your ears that you can't hear otherwise. Remember, if you're wearing isolating earphones, they don't isolate 100% of the onstage sound. Right? They do make things quieter, which is good. But again, if you're standing next to the drum kit, even with isolating earphones in, you're still going to hear the drums. So do you need to put those in your ears? Maybe not. I think just about every singer in every band I've ever done in-ear monitors for never asks for drums in their ears. Mm-hmm. You can hear them anyway. Yep. Right? So, but things like keyboards, for example, that are direct, right? Any direct signal, you're not going to hear it at all if you don't put it in your ear. So that should be the first thing that you add, anything that's electronic in nature. And then as you kind of move from left to right across the spectrum here, these are additional things that you would, and that you would definitely need to add to your ears to maybe you want to think about not putting in your ears because you don't need to there. And taking this more minimalist approach then allows you to not have to work so hard to get it to sound good. Just think about what it is that you need to hear to perform successfully, start there, and then blend in a little of whatever else you kind of need.
If you add too much of everything, it just becomes mush.
Right.
And you can't hear anything.
And you can't hear anything. And then it becomes volume wars of just trying to turn everything up. Mm-hmm. Can't hear that, turn it up. Can't hear that, turn it up. Can't hear that, turn it up. And then it just, it gets all mush and it's no good. So that's kind of the first sort of tip. Other thing is a common complaint for performers using isolating earphones, though, is they feel kind of disconnected from the audience. It doesn't feel as live. They can't get the cheering, or they don't hear the, just the kind of sound coming off the back of the hall or whatever. So you can use ambient microphones, set up a couple of condenser mics on either side of the stage and kind of have those blended back into your in-ears a little bit to pick up more of that room sound. If you're a drummer and you kind of miss that, the oomph of the subwoofer kind of, giving you that physical sensation, they make transducers that can attach directly to the drum throne that every time you hit that kick drum, it physically shakes the thing and gives you that same sensation. So you can do that. A little bit of reverb, some effects can be used to sort of open up the sound a little bit if you need to, something that is really generally not a good idea with floor wedge monitors, but can work a lot better with in-ears. And always, always, always use the limiter. These systems are capable of some extremely high sound pressure levels, and the limiter is on these things not because, I really wish it sounded like it needs some compression. That's not this type of limiter. It is a brick wall limiter that is designed to help protect your hearing in the case of unexpected loud sound events. If you hear the limiter working, if it sounds like, everything sounds really squished all the time, it's because you're listening too loud and you need to turn it down. So always use those. Which leads into the next topic. Will personal monitors protect my hearing? The answer is they can if used properly. And that's kind of a big deal because there is a bit of a misconception, I think, that people just think, oh, I want to save my hearing, I'm going to use personal monitors. Well, yeah, hang on. These systems can still produce sound levels above 130 dB SPL, depending on the earphone you're using. That's a lot of sound, right? It's why you want to have that limiter in there. Really, the best thing that you can do is visit an audiologist on a regular basis anyway, which is something you probably would want to do as a musician anyway. Your hearing is very important, and a regular visit to a hearing doctor will allow you to establish a baseline hearing test and go back and see if anything's changed, and that will give you the feedback as to whether or not you're really using these things properly. Keeping in mind also that it's kind of a time-based thing as well. So over here on the right, we see some kind of typical sound pressure levels. You can see 120 dB SPL is about the threshold of pain, and rock music at 10 feet isn't that far behind it there. So you definitely we're talking about some serious sound pressure level here. But the other component to it is how long you're listening for. So the OSHA standards, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, kind of set some standards for how long you can be exposed to certain sound pressure levels before hearing damage can occur. So if you're listening at 110 dB SPL, that's fine for up to 30 minutes, but after that, you might be doing some damage. So if you have a 2-hour gig, you probably want to keep that down to 100 dB SPL, right? Now, unfortunately, these devices don't have a little meter on them that says, I'm at 100 dB SPL. You won't know that by looking at it. The only way to really determine that is to actually have, little measurement microphones in your ear canal while you're using these in-ear monitors that can report that back to you. So again, some tips to make sure that you're doing all that you can. Always use isolating earphones like we talked about at the beginning, and always use both of them. Mm-hmm. This is something we see time and time again that is a no-no. I know you see performers on television performances doing this, yanking out an earphone. Don't do that ever. And here's why. I mean, this is not just me being on a soapbox for no reason. If the science behind it is that if you have one ear without an earphone in it and another one with it, that earphone has to be 6 dB louder than what the open air ear is hearing. That means to perceive anything happening or to hear out of that earphone. So that means if you're at 110 dB SPL on stage, your in-ear monitors have to be at 116 in order to perceive anything going on there. So we're talking about some seriously loud sounds there. So again, always use both earphones. Always use the limiter. Pay attention to what your ears are telling you. If your ears are ringing or your head feels muffled or whatever after you play a gig, you're probably listening too loud. You should definitely visit an audiologist on a regular basis, whether or not you use in-ear monitors. But,
well, your hearing as a musician is your most important piece of gear, and it's the only one that you can't replace.
That's right. When those cells die in your inner ear,
you're done.
That's it. They don't regenerate, unfortunately. All right, a couple minutes here before we take questions. I just want to give you a quick overview of the new PSM 300 system that's coming out. Again, this is pretty much replacing the PSM 200, our former entry-level system. You'll notice one benefit right off the bat is that 300 offers you stereo monitoring, which you couldn't do with the PSM 200. It was mono only, which meant no mix mode capabilities either. It was always one transmitter per mix and only up to 4 transmitters. So right off the bat, here's a great advantage with the new system that's coming out. You'll see right here, there's actually going to be 2 different configurations that you can buy. One that's a little more entry level, one that's a little bit more professional. So the one on the left is a little bit more entry level. It includes the P3R wireless body pack. The one on the right is the P3RA. We'll talk about how those are different. And then they also include 2 different earphones. The one on the left includes the SE112, which is a dynamic driver earphone, kind of a low cost, still pretty good sounding universal fit earphone with a permanently attached cable. On the right, it includes the SE215, which is a balanced armature transducer with a detachable replaceable cable, which is kind of a nice thing if your cable happens to break or whatever. And again, a little bit smaller size, a little bit higher fidelity sound quality. But let's get into the wireless components here. And here you see the P3T, which is a rack mount, a half rack size transmitter. Again, stereo or mono transmission. It says it has 24-bit digital audio processing. This bears a little bit of explanation because it's not a digital wireless system. The actual transmission is still good old FM analog transmission, but the audio processing that needs to happen in any analog wireless system in this case is handled in the digital realm, which really offers vast improvements in terms of sound quality, lower noise, wider dynamic range, fewer companion artifacts, all of that good stuff. So when you do that digitally in the transmitter and then after it's demodulated in the receiver, you really get a good benefit there without the latency, the additional latency that can sometimes happen in a fully digital wireless system. And we mentioned that because latency, which is a delay in the signal that happens when digital signal processing is involved, in a digital wireless system, that could be distracting potentially to users of in-ear monitors where you have, an earphone stuck in your ear and bone conduction while you're singing. The latency can potentially throw you off, but there's really hardly any very minimal latency on this system at all, which is great. It has the IR synchronization for the scan and sync feature that we were talking about earlier. 24 megahertz tuning range, which is pretty wide, allow you to find a number of clear frequencies in most locations, up to 15 compatible frequencies, which is a lot, and selectable output power. So here's the first slightly lower cost receiver, the P3R. It's a plastic body pack, which is, sometimes scares people away. Oh, it's plastic. Well, it's the stuff is torture tested like all of our other stuff and dropped and stepped on and everything else. So, but the plastic does allow us to make a little bit more inexpensive body pack. Stereo or mixed mode operation. You've got the volume and balance controls that you need to work with that. Scan for clear frequencies, IR sync to the transmitter, all that good stuff. Runs on AA batteries. So with a good alkaline, like a Energizer or a Duracell, you should be able to get up to 6 hours of continuous runtime. P3RA, the slightly more expensive model, is the professional version. And if, for those of you who are familiar with our PSM 900 system, you might be looking at that body pack and thinking it looks kind of familiar, and it should, because it is mechanically the same metal pack as the P9 RA. But again, designed to work with the PSM 300 system. So not only does it give you the metal belt pack, you have an LCD display, 2-band shelving EQ, so you have kind of a low frequency and a high frequency shelving EQ to give the individual performer some ability to kind of EQ their own mix, which is cool. The volume limiter is sort of adjustable on here, so you can kind of tweak that to something that's going to work for you. And most importantly, this pack can work with the Shure SB900 rechargeable battery. So if you want to get into that smart lithium-ion rechargeable technology that a lot of our other products use, that's available on the P3RA. And here you can see some of the accessories that support the system. Most of these are the rechargeable battery and the different charging options, but I do want to point out we have a new antenna combiner, a half-rack size device, the PA411, which will allow the RF signal from 4 transmitters to be combined down to a single antenna, which is actually pretty essential when you have several of these high-powered transmitters kind of grouped together in a rack. Minimizing the number of antennas usually can actually vastly improve the performance of the system. And we have a couple other 4 and 8 input combiners out there that were designed for the more pro systems that are fairly pricey. So now we've got this lower cost unit that will work well with the PSM 300 system. So we've kind of reached the end of my spiel here. Before we take Q&A, I do want to point out that we do have an educational booklet you can get on our website, Selection and Operation of Personal Monitor Systems, which will give you more detailed information on sort of the history of these things and how to configure them and how they work and all of that sort of good stuff. Now I'm going to pass it back to Cheryl.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions, but before we dive into those, just a few other things to mention here. Our next webinar is going to be about how to choose a Shure wireless system. So we don't have the date exactly yet for that, but it will be in November. And if you want to be a part of that, if you go to shure.com/subscribe, that will give you an option to opt in for a newsletter that will keep you up to date with when these dates are. So you'll get emails saying, what our next webinars are and giving you that chance to sign up for them so you don't miss one. So let's dive right into the questions. First one here, someone here that's looking for an entry-level unit that can grow and asking what he should look for. And I would say definitely the PSM 300 is probably a really good place to start, especially because we have those 2 different tiers. With that entry level with the plastic body pack and the SE112s, then if you want to upgrade your earphones over time, you can. If you want to upgrade to the RA rechargeable pack over time, you can. It really does give you a lot of room to grow. And with getting up to 15 different systems on one, in one frequency band, you definitely have room to have as many transmitters added over time as you need. So I think even that one would be a really good one that you could hold on to for the long run.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, because the next tier up is the PSM 900, which is a pretty significant jump in price from the 300, and if you're already using the P3RA, which is the metal pack that's very similar to the 900, the only real advantage to using the 900 is wider frequency tuning range with even more transmitters on the air. So if it's the kind of thing where like you're thinking someday you're gonna have more than 15 wireless mixes needed, then maybe you'd start with the 900. The 900 does offer a higher power mode as well, 100 milliwatt power mode. So if you find yourself in a really long range applications because you're on a huge stage or something, then maybe you would need that. But again, for most people that are just kind of more the average kind of working gigging band, 300 will probably cover it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I have a question here regarding a user who uses in-ear monitors, and he wants to get the rest of his band to start using them. But the guitar players complain that the IEMs will not translate the guitar cabinet sound, and so they don't even want to give it a try. Do you have any suggestions? I mean, do you think that that's true, or what are your thoughts on that, Gino?
Well, it's going to be a little different because you are listening to the mic'd signal, right? You're not listening to it's not the same as having your ear sitting right next to the cabinet, right? So, I think that their concerns are valid, but I don't think it's an insurmountable problem, provided that, maybe you need to experiment with different mics on the guitar cabinet. Maybe you need to start bringing your own mics or something, try to find what works and then try experimenting with mic placement. In fact, in-ear monitors are a great way to do that because you can hear directly what the microphone is hearing because it's fed into your in-ear monitor system. So is it going to be different? Yes, it's not going to be exactly the same as sitting there, right in front of the guitar cabinet. But again, the advantage is that, now you can start setting up mixes where people can hear exactly what it is they want to hear, and they can have it EQ'd if they've got a personal mix for however it is they want to hear it. So it's going to take some experimentation. It's going to take some getting used to, but typically the advantages once someone actually uses it, the trick is getting them to do it once for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And then usually most people, once they use it, they go, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
Oh my, I can hear myself now, right? Because you're not, your guitar sound isn't being overwhelmed by the cymbals or whatever, So those are things that you can work with and it'll happen.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, what are your thoughts about adding a multi-band compressor to reduce any peaks from the singers in your aux mix? This person finds that with his PSM 900, they sometimes get hit with an uncomfortable peak when the singer pushes, and that putting a limiter on his voice would affect the whole mix. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that's true. And that's actually what you're mentioning is very commonly done. In fact, there was a few companies in the earlier days of in-ear monitor systems that actually made sort of DSP rack mount devices that were specifically designed as in-ear monitor processors. And one of the things they would put in there is a multi-band compressor, because you're right, unlike a traditional compressor, which kind of compresses everything when it's hit above a certain threshold, you can sort of tweak the multi-band compressor to a specific frequency range and then use that to just attenuate that particular frequency range when it gets peaky. So that's typically the kind of thing, though, that's, that type of device is, either you're going to have to spend some time with it yourself learning how to use it or consult with a professional sound engineer that is familiar with it to kind of show you, okay, here's how we're probably going to, want to need to set this. They're not, a multi-band compressor isn't necessarily for the novice to use, but could certainly be effective for that.
Okay, definitely. All right, well, that wraps up all the questions we've got for this afternoon. We want to thank you so much for joining us. Please, if you have any questions that you forgot to ask, you can send those to support@shure.com, and one of our friendly engineers will be happy to answer any questions you've got. And we hope to see you next time when we discuss choosing personal wireless systems.